Hi, and welcome to my channel. I am Dr. Keisha Ducree, creator of the Soul Journers Academy, and I have this channel to talk about Black women, power, race, geography, with a little bit of travel as well. I am so excited because I actually went to see the controversial statue of the 12-foot tall Black woman at Times Square. It's gone now. So some people are probably applauding that. But I found the statue and the debates around the statue to be a very, very interesting way of, sorry, my phone is going off. I found the statue itself, its representation, and the debates around her presence to be a really good, interesting thing to talk about from a Black feminist perspective, Black feminist geographies perspective. So I want you to sit back, take a couple of minutes, let's dissect this. And I want to talk about the kind of three takeaways from that 12-foot tall bronze sculpture of a Black woman in Times Square. The sculpture is called Grounded in the Stars. I'm having all kind of technical stuff right now. I have my microphone. Can you hear me? Because it's all noises. Anyway, let's focus. So again, three takeaways from the statue Grounded in the Stars. And if you like what I'm talking about, if you've been checking out a couple of my videos, if you think what I'm saying is interesting, I would love for you to take a moment right now to like and subscribe. I've been traveling quite a bit. Maybe you've seen from my other videos about my travels, and I have a lot to say as a Black feminist geographer and a professor of Black studies, who not only talks about Black women in the world, but also leads people on study abroad trips to places in the diaspora. So stay with me, please follow me. So the sculpture itself is called Grounded in the Stars. Now, she's been called everything under the sun by people, but the sculpture is called Grounded in the Stars. It is by a British, I'm checking my notes. It is by a British sculptor, a brother named Thomas J. Price. And it was not commissioned for Times Square. I mean, it was the Times Square Foundation did an installation, prepared for installation of this statue for the spring. She was placed there around April 29th, I believe. And then I was able to go there the weekend before and take a picture, as you saw from my thumbnail, to take a picture in front of her the week before it was being uninstalled, deinstalled. I'm not sure about the correct language. So I was there about a week before. So I think it came down June 15th. It was removed, but she came from a permanent location exhibition, and I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put it in the description, an article about the sculptor himself. He produces, this is within his genre. He produces sculpture that reflects the everyday person, but the everyday person in monument form. So, she is 12 feet tall, and the choice is deliberate not to make a 5'4" or 5'5" sculpture of a woman that can blend in with the crowd. He wants to take a person with street clothes on and with a casual pose, and elevate what I call an everyday person into a monument, into a 12-foot tall woman. And we're going to talk about that in the takeaways. Okay, so the takeaways are, and then I'll go through them. I wanted to give you a brief introduction because she's been called everything but the child of God. So the official sculpture name is Grounded in the Stars. And three of the takeaways are, got my notes. The strange bedfellows of those who have critiqued this. So it is both the very conservative, very racist people with microphones, primarily on Fox News, along with a certain segment of Black folks. So they're both have problems with this sculpture. So we're going to talk about that. Number one takeaway. Number two takeaway is this issue of monumentality and the fights that we have had as a country in who we choose to celebrate in public memory. It is a long simmering culture war that has kind of reached its peak in the last couple of years. And so we'll talk about that. And number three, Black Feminist Perspective 101. What does it mean to have Black women in the center? Black women in the center has everyone shook, okay? To have a Black woman commanding a space in the center of a space, of a public space, has everybody shook. And we're going to talk about that too. So let's get going because my kids are going to be home from school. So in the research that I did about Times Square Foundation bringing in this particular sculpture, they described it, Thomas Price and his work, as countering the conventional standards of monumentality. And so, you know, from a geographic perspective, there are some choices that were made in where she was placed. Okay, we could talk about, and I'll talk about monumentality in terms of the size and who we celebrate very in public memory. But it's important that Times Square, probably the most visited space, mainly among tourists, the most visited space in Manhattan, and the decision to put something, a symbol there. And then if you go there, it's that, I mean, Times Square in of itself, the couple of blocks that it is just packed. But this particular area is very, very visible because it has that staircase. I don't know if you've been there, but there's that staircase. It's a very common place that when you think of Times Square, with the billboards around, they have this accordion level set of seats that people hang out. People do selfies there in general. And it's right next to the ticket booth where you get your half price tickets, by the way. And so there are two smaller permanent installations that she has been intentionally placed between. Now, I have been there quite a few times, just walking through, don't really hang out there. But I've never even noticed these. So there's two really kind of small monuments there of white men, which probably 98% of statues are. And so it was, in terms of space, she was essentially put right there in between those. So a woman, if you haven't, I can describe her, but you have the picture in the thumbnail. She is a rather heavyset Black woman. She has on a t-shirt, pair of jeans. She has her hands on her hip. She has her hands on her hip. Sorry. 90s kid, you just break out into whatever song was popular. Anyway, and she's kind of looking off with a neutral expression, right? And when I first saw her, I was like, she looks like me. My body looks just like that. On an average day, I'll have on a t-shirt and she looks like me. She looks like me at 12 feet tall. She looks like so many people that I know. And to have her, to see her there at 12 feet tall looming above all the people below, and perhaps one of the most visited sites is significant. You do feel a certain way. I felt it as affirming. But a lot of people didn't. So let's get into that. So number one, the strange bedfellows of the haters. So I didn't even know, because my social media world, my bubble is really just, I don't have Fox News MAGA people in my social media bubble. If I hear about things, it's because I hear, progressive folks, woke folks talking about something they said or did. Okay. And so that's how I came across. So when I first encountered critique of Grounded, it was from other Black folks. Okay. And then the New York Times came out with an article that I will link that introduces the critique from, Fox News hosts saying, who paid for this? Who wants to see that? And being very, you know how they are. So the first time I heard critiques were Black folks who were very incensed about the Grounded. And then from the New York Times article, who starts with the the conservatives, the racists, the bigots, how they were also upset about the idea of, who paid for that, and the audacity of having, this Grounded at Times Square. And so these are two different groups who can be lumped into the same camp of haters, right? So we know why the critiques of the conservatives say what they say. I mean, they don't want to see Black and brown people anywhere, right? I mean, what we see now in terms of the current regime is the intentions of whitening American society, right? People are looking at the demographic shift and seeing that the United States is rapidly becoming dominated by Black and brown bodies. And so really everything from the ICE raids and the deportation and the cutting of funding, of safety nets, because they think they're sticking it to, people of color, to the gutting of DEI, all of these things are at the heart of, we need to make the US whiter. Right. We want, on the other hand, you see people, it's like, how can we get, white women, let's say white women have more babies, right? This is all a campaign. The regime's campaign is, biological, a race to create a whiter nation. So you can imagine, if your underlying philosophy is to create a whiter nation, that you want to erase any trace, any trace of things that are not white. And having a 12-foot Black woman in Times Square is an affront to your campaign of whitening America. So we understand the motivations of, Fox News hosts and MAGA people who attack the audacity of having a 12-foot Black woman's body, in the center. But why Black folks? Why a certain segment of Black folks, who I found out first, why did they get all head up? Well, they thought it was stereotyping. They thought it was, some said it was dehumanizing. Some said, that point blank, they don't want to be represented that way, right? Very unnerved by the presence of an overweight Black woman dressed in, street clothes, hands on the hips, attitude. Some found that to lean into a stereotype. I don't talk about this much, but we can, the stereotypes of sassy, which is the satire, caricatures of Black women, or the overweight is lending mammy vibes or something like that. So they, some of the Black critics of it were offended by the not the idea of a Black woman, but the representation of that type of Black woman. So the conservative people didn't want her there at all. We want to erase every form, every public display of non-white maleness, right? But the Black folks, I think they would have been happy. The critics would have been happy if it was a willowy form of woman, Black woman, and she was draped in, I don't know, Greco-Roman robes. She had to look royal and presentable, and her hair would flow. Like, they desire Black representation, but they want an assimilated form of representation, right? So that was interesting. And I want to dig in a little bit about, what is driving the folks that critique an everyday heavyset Black woman and see her as a stereotype and dehumanizing. Their philosophy is undergirded by a concept called the politics of respectability, or respectability politics. And some of you may be aware of that. It was a term coined by Evelyn Higginbotham to describe a type of strategy by Black elite to police Black people, particularly really poor Black people, police them and try to encourage them to have comportment and manners and education and dress right. And undergirding the beliefs of politics of respectability is this idea that if we as Black people sound cultured, dress correctly, present ourselves in every form, and cloak ourselves in Black excellence, then the whites will have to accept us, will recognize our humanity, right? How's that working for us? How's that work? How's that working out? How's this working out? Now that we wear suits and ties and dresses and, wear the right things, attend the right schools, how has this worked out? Let me think about it. It is a very real thing. And the way it manifests itself, this idea of politics of respectability and, thinking that you have to say the right things, do the right things, say it in the right way, wear the right clothes, wear the hair the right way, that suddenly you will be accepted. You see it happening, and you see the discomfort of people who believe in that when they see the visibility of, I don't know, ratchetness. They are shook when they see things that are opposite that. They hate saggy pants and hoodies, and you need to speak the right way, with the disdain, with the level of disdain at people, Black people who do not believe in this level of comportment. The level of disdain that the Black elite have for them is almost level to the way racists and bigots have, right? And so I'm a little bit sympathetic. Because, they drank the Kool-Aid and they believe in, and I guess if they, they're invested in the answer that if we talk right, act right, dress right, that we will have the full rights of citizenship in this country. And there's a large segment that believe in that, and we follow the path. I'm like we, I have pieces of it too, although I definitely come from a poor background. So I had to learn, some of this and unlearn it. But I'm sympathetic because for folks who are invested in this, what is the alternative? if you can't get full citizenship by this total character assimilation, because we can't change our color, texture of our hair. If you can't get that through, if that barrier still exists, that's just skin color and how you present, then what the hell? I mean, what are you going to do? Right? So much of the modern civil rights era has had this philosophy of the politics of respectability. And so that same politics of respectability and the idea that we should always present in a pristine way is why many Black folks were offended by the Grounded in the Star statue. It is what it is. Number 3, a note about monuments and monumentality. So remember I said at the very beginning that Price, the sculptor, he does create these larger than life images of everyday people, everyday Black people. And you can think of his approach is almost a little bit the opposite of, I don't want to make these trite comparisons about art and artists because it's not fair. They're much deeper than that, and I respect art. But if you think of an artist like Kehinde Wiley, who does everyday people, his paintings are of everyday people. So he's the artist who did the portrait for Barack Obama, but he's also well known having these beautiful, rich, stylized pictures of everyday Black people. So he's a painter versus Price is a sculptor. They're everyday Black people, not including the former president of the United States, but they are cloaked in the Western Baroque fashion. So he places them within kind of royal clothes, and he presents them in a traditional way that art is done, but he puts Black people in it, right? And so Piero does away with the presentation of this kind of royal rich Western dress. He puts everyday people and he makes everyday people. They're not cloaked in or dressed like a different, let's say, class or era or exalted era status. And so if you look at his work, again, I have a link, that's what he does. He does away, as a sculptor, he strips away everything but the everyday person in their everyday clothes and style. And you can see that in Grounded, by her dress, by her posture, with a casual hand on the hips, a bend in the knee, and looking, she could be she could be a woman, a real woman standing on the corner waiting to cross the street, right? No, no flowing cloak, looking windswept. You know how the women sculptures, they all look like the wind is blowing, the hair and the clothes are flowing. None of that. She looks like if you made her down the size that she would be waiting on the corner like everybody else trying to cross the street. So our monuments, our United States monuments, what we choose to honor, what we choose to cast in bronze and porcelain and marble, who we depict in this country as our heroes says a lot about ourselves, but says as much about who we want to be, right? This idea of monumentality. And there's been a rich debate about, trying to diversify that, because, we like war heroes, no matter what side they fought on. We have Confederate, basically traitors, who were all over, all over the country. We choose to celebrate, patriotism. We choose to celebrate men. We choose to celebrate white men. When we do choose to monumentalize women, there are typically They're very few, by the way. We typically would not do a non-white woman, and she is usually cloaked in kind of a feminist, I mean, a feminine, not feminist, a feminine mystique, right? And so I said earlier that, we always think of one of the big culture wars in terms of sexuality and sexual identities, but I think kind of the longest culture war is the way we depict monuments. And the reason why I say that is, if you recall, that crazy moment was at 2016, 2017, the Charlottesville riot. Remember that? Remember the march? And they all had on the khaki pants with the torches, kind of weird. That rebellion, that temper tantrum of neo-Nazis came about, you may have forgotten, and resulted in a murder of a woman after a protest. That came about, that was sparked by the fight over monuments. Remember? Yeah. So we know what happened. We remember the images, and we remember, that guy saying some of them are good people. We remember we remember the clashes. We remember the murder of the woman with the guy who ran through the line of counter protesters. But that was sparked by monuments. That was sparked by the wave of people being upset and protesting the presence of Confederate heroes on monuments. Monuments are a big deal. It's not small. You're like, oh, she's talking about monuments. That culture war of who gets to be represented and who this country is founded upon and for, our aspirations as well as our history, is always being contested. And that, for neo-Nazis and the idea of people questioning the presence of Robert E. Lee and other Confederate traitors being the center of monuments in places, is what sparked that uprising. They will not replace us. Remember now. So monuments may sound trivial. You drive past them, but they really are markers in our culture of the past and how we see ourselves in the future. So if you think about monumentality in this case, the audacity of Times Square Foundation to take Thomas Price, larger than life depictions of everyday people, and put her in the center, is countering our narratives of monumentality and who gets to be seen, who gets to be celebrated, who gets to be seen at 12 feet tall and cast in bronze, the permanency of bronze, right? And so it seems so small, but yet this is an ongoing fight of who gets to be seen and represented and celebrated. And we live in a world that has been organized by space around whiteness and maleness, patriarchy, around war heroes. Where are our monuments to love? Where are monuments to love? So again, monumentality and this fight is big. It is a proxy for the anger, at least on the conservative side, about the presence of grounded with stars. I already told you what was going on with Black folks who did. The anger around it, again, is this campaign to make America white again. You see where I went there? Right? So monumentality is very important. The artist Carrie Mae Weems has a project, I'll link that as well, where they're looking in a Mellon Foundation project looking at public memory. And you saw, following the backlash of the Charlottesville, and you saw the kind of racial reckoning, the very brief racial reckoning of 2020, following the murder of George Floyd, that people renewed their attacks against these monuments and statues. I remember passing Robert E. Lee statue for years as an undergraduate in New Orleans, Tulane, roll wave. And I remember I flew down for a conference and I was like, oh my God, it's gone. Like Lee Circle, it's still called Lee Circle. I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong. I go by it from Lee, Robert E. Lee Circle has no Lee, has no statue. We even saw in Belgium during like the racial, this was a global uprising, that protesters had thrown paint on King Leopold of Belgium, and highlighting his atrocities to the people of the current Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so, people all globally are saying, why do we have this person who owned slaves? Why do we have this person who brutalized indigenous people? Why do we have this person? Why are we honoring these people? And so this debate is a proxy for who we want to be, who we want to celebrate, and how we want to be in the future. So it shouldn't be, taken lightly. It's an interesting thing to watch. And because I'm getting long, and I think that, it's very clear that when someone decides to take an everyday Black woman like me and put her in the center of a space, it has people shook. And in many ways, it's almost a test that you can take as a Black woman who doesn't engage in the politics of respectability. When you ask people, what do they think about it? Because in many ways, how you respond to grounded is also about how you think about me. She's the closest. She is, because she still exists. She's back to a permanent installation. She is a reflection of me. And if you're offended by her, you probably are offended by me, right? The world does not like Black women to take up space, certainly not the center. Certainly not the center. And that isn't just white folks, right? We see Misogynoir occurring against us by a rainbow, a rainbow of folks. And so I can't help but think about the last election when a Black woman was politically taking up the center. And I mean, this is a Black woman who was cloaked in Black excellence, right? So there was no reason for people who followed the politics of respectability to ever have anything against Kamala Harris, right? She had the right CV, a resume. She went to the right school. She talked the right way. She wore her suits. There's nothing ratchet about her at all. And when she ever dipped her toe into like dancing or something, it was tasteful, right? Not a little too much shimmy shake, right? So we had a chance to put a Black woman in the center, and people couldn't do it. People could not do it. And here we are. Here we are. But I remain hopeful. I mean, because what else can I do? what else can I do? The brief time that Grounded with the Stars was there, like, again, I'm so happy that I was able to go up there and witness it for myself. And it shows, it is a temperature gauge in whether or not, segments of our society. Well, we had a huge temperature gauge in November 2024, and clearly there are a significant number of our population who do not cannot tolerate a Black woman in the center. And we see from the reactions of another physically a Black woman in the center of Times Square that people cannot stomach that either. And so I appreciated that brief moment. I appreciated the campaign. And, I keep pressing on because in many ways, their fear of losing the United States, you know what I'm talking about, is makes me feel good. The more scared they are, the more insane their tactics, the desperation that they show tells me that you're doing something right. So keep your head up. If you haven't seen her, please get pictures. Again, in the description, I will provide kind of the artist statement, the New York Times article, and a couple of other things that might be interested to undergird this. So thanks for the chit chat. Again, don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. In the comments, let me know if you saw it. I don't think you can post your pictures. You can post them and on Instagram, and you can copy me at Kayvolver, KAYVOLVER, Kayvolver. And let me see if you took your pictures with Grounded in the Stars as well. So until later.